Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidi. The time is 14 minutes past 8 Central African time, and we're going to be kickstarting the show with what I think is the biggest story in the country right now. Tensions are simmering in the Eastern Cape. This is after violent protests erupted in Kukompo, where residents took to the streets over the alleged coronation of a Nigerian national. This gentleman goes by the name of Solomon Ogbonna Iziko. He was coronated as the Igwe Ndigbo, a king of the Igbo community out in the Eastern Cape. And what looked like or began as an online outrage quickly escalated to a full-on protest yesterday with at least 12 vehicles being torched and one person reportedly stabbed, and police deploying rubber bullets and stun grenades to try and disperse the crowds. And at the heart of this controversy, I think something that is much deeper. First is a question of whether or not a foreign national can be recognized as a traditional leader in South Africa, and also the conversation around immigration. We've seen overwhelming sentiment, especially over the past few years, where there's been, especially online, we've never seen it actually filter out onto the streets, where South Africans have been talking about sovereignty and what it means for them when there seems to be an influx of foreign nationals into the country and the government seemingly not doing anything about it. So we're going to be unpacking that very important topic. There were a number of organizations that were there, and one of them was ActionSA. And we'll be speaking to ActionSA's Eastern Cape Chair, Athol Trollip, who's joining us via our virtual platform. Mr. Trollip, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. I've told your team that I can't really hear you very well. You keep breaking up. I don't know if you can hear me.
I'll try to be as audible as I can. I can hear you loud and clear, and I want us to jump right into it. ActionSA was at that protest yesterday. It turned out very violent. From your perspective, can you give us insight on, firstly, why ActionSA thought it was important to be a part of it, and secondly, what led to its eruption? What led to this protest ultimately turning out violent as it did?
Yeah, thanks very much. First of all, we believed it was necessary to attend the march in solidarity with the traditional leadership of the Eastern Cape. The Eastern Cape has 5 recognized kings. They recognized in the Constitution, appointed by their own people and endorsed by the President of South Africa. Now, as you've said in your introduction, there was a Nigerian who has been coronated as an Igbo king in the Eastern Cape. Now, we believe as ActionSA that there's no constitutional provision for such an action. But then what really troubled us was one of the spokespersons had said that they were going to establish an Igbo homeland in the Eastern Cape, and that they were going to encourage their brothers and sisters from Nigeria to come in their hundreds of thousands to be part of the homeland in the Eastern Cape. Now, we believe that that is the ultimate provocation, totally disrespectful of our own indigenous traditional leaders, kings and queens and princesses and princes and their chieftaincies. And we attended the march in solidarity with South Africans and our own traditional leadership. What's more, we have 2 homelands in the Eastern Cape, or former homelands, that are a legacy of apartheid. And that is a very bitter legacy, because the people who live in those former homelands are the most impoverished people in this country, and certainly in the Eastern Cape. And we are totally against the establishment of any other homelands. So we were there in solidarity and support of the traditional leaders, and the march started very well in very disciplined fashion. There were many traditional leaders there. Coronation representatives were there, people from SANCO and ISANCO and various other organizations. And the march started very well, and there were lots of police. And then when we got into an area in Kukompo, which is formerly East London, where many foreign nationals live, things became a little more tense, because as we were marching along, more and more people spontaneously joined the march. And it became more and more difficult to control those people. And as we entered Oxford Street, which is the main street of East London and where the City Hall is situated, I could feel the tension rising, and there was a lot of provocation, people shouting at foreigners who were looking down on the street from buildings in the higher floors. And the march got progressively more and more tense, with some, problematic and even xenophobic commentary coming from the crowd. Anyway, we got to City Hall, and a vehicle was parked where people who were going to present speeches and hand over the petition climbed onto, and the mayor and the deputy minister had come out to meet the crowd and to accept the petition. And the deputy minister himself is a well-respected traditional leader in the Eastern Cape. He's a Prince Zolile Burns Namashe, and they were all ready to receive the petition. And then there was a commotion, and the organizers of the march marched to march, then got a young man to stand up on that bakkie or vehicle where we were standing, and pulled up his shirt and showed the crowd that he had been stabbed very badly in his back, and there was a gaping wound with blood coming out of it. Well, that just inflamed the crowd, and they then immediately carried on with the march or protest action beyond the limits of what had been applied for. And that was the end of the march. The petition wasn't even handed over. And I believe that's when the situation got out of control, when people just went on the rampage out of anger that one of the protesters had been stabbed allegedly by a Nigerian.
How do you respond to those that say, this coronation could be interpreted more as just a cultural title than a formal traditional authority? Isn't there a distinction there, and does it even matter?
Well, look, I respond as follows. As I said to you, there was the announcement that this king had been coronated, and the High Commission of Nigeria had put out a statement to say it's just a ceremonial issue and there's nothing, no disrespect intended. Okay, that's all well and good, and maybe if they'd left it there, it wouldn't have become such a big problem. But when their spokesperson said they're going to establish a homeland and call on their brothers and sisters to come in their hundreds of thousands to the Eastern Cape, that was much more than a simple provocation. That was an indication of colonization. And that really was completely disrespectful and unacceptable, because we have no such provision in our constitution. And as I said, we have our own traditional leaders in the Eastern Cape. So, I think the situation got out of control after those utterances. And I note that the High Commission of Nigeria has now put out a formal statement advising Nigerians in the country to keep a low profile. And in fact, I'll read you some of the recommendations. If you want me to, I can do that.
Please do.
They say the following, and it's got the official stamp of the High Commission, and it's an advisory to all Nigerian citizens to be conscious and mindful of personal and individual safety, to moderate movement and limit interaction with strange persons or people, maintain a low profile at all times, remain law-abiding and pay respect to local laws and customs, suspend any form of socio-cultural activities forthwith, avoid inflammatory statements on social or mainstream media capable of heightening the current tensions, stay clear of any demonstration or counter-protest, refrain from indulging in unnecessary ostentation and flamboyance, and report any likelihood of threat to life or personal safety to local police. All nationals are enjoined to consult either the High Commission in Pretoria or the Consulate General in Johannesburg if there's any doubt about these aforementioned measures. Now, that indicates that there might perhaps have not been the necessary low profile and respect of cultural sensitivities, and to suspend any form of socio-cultural activities that might inflame the situation. Now, I think, there's always the possibility when you have a march that grows and gathers momentum as it goes along, and people who might not have a direct stake in that march just happen to go along, they become less and less manageable. Excuse me. And I think that's what happened in this march. More and more people that had just joined spontaneously become unmanageable, and the situation became inflamed. And it was clear that the local foreigners, legal or illegal, of Nigerian nationality, had taken some umbrage to this march, because there was this contact and this conflict where a person was stabbed and one person was driven over by a motor vehicle, apparently driven by a foreign national. So once there was that conflict point, that's when the march got completely out of control, and even the South African police services lost control of that march. And what resulted thereafter is really, really regrettable, because more people were assaulted, vehicles were stoned and set alight, and some shops were even looted. Now, that's completely unacceptable, and ActionSA wants to distance itself as far as possible from that kind of behavior, because if we are marching and protesting against a constitutional conflict, then we ourselves need to make sure that we are within the bounds of the constitution and laws of this country. And unfortunately, the large percentage of the people in that protest found themselves outside of the bounds of the constitution and the laws of this country, and took the law into their own hands and started looting and assaulting people. Now, that's completely unacceptable.
No, most definitely. The next question I'll ask you is one that a lot of people are also uttering. The fact that we are heading to the local government elections, and a lot of electioneering will be happening. And with this situation, with ActionSA being included, does it in any way risk inflaming anti-immigrant sentiment a bit more in cases like this one, knowing and understanding the challenges that South Africans have, and the anti-migrant sentiment that seems to be bubbling up? And also, how do we go about balancing legitimate legal concerns like an influx of illegal undocumented foreigners in the country with the risk of xenophobia, which is very, very dangerous? We've been here before where we saw xenophobic violence 2007, 2008, and it got really, really out of hand. And political parties have a responsibility to make sure that we don't go back there. How do you respond to those two questions?
Well, first of all, let me make it quite clear that ActionSA did not provoke this situation. We didn't make any unilateral declarations and establishment of kingdoms and calling for, establishment of a homeland in the Eastern Cape. So let's understand that the genesis of this incident was from Nigerians making these kind of outrageous claims. We went there in solidarity with our traditional leaders, who are respected in this province and recognized by the constitution and our laws, and are obviously come from royal bloodlines. And there were even people there from the Khoi and San, who are the first people of this country, and their traditional leadership hasn't been fully resolved in South Africa, and there's still outstanding issues about who are the actual traditional leaders. So this is a very fraught issue, and it was not started by ActionSA to drum up any kind of electoral support. We were there in solidarity. Secondly, we have made our point very clear that we know that we live in a global village, and that people move all over the globe very freely, but we recognize that people must do so legally. And if people enter our country illegally and involve themselves in unlawful activities such as illicit trade, human trafficking, prostitution, gangsterism, those are the issues that go hand in hand with undocumented immigrants in this country, and that is undisputed. And we are saying that we are a sovereign country, and we expect everyone who is South African to respect the law, but certainly foreigners to respect the law. But you cannot be an illegal immigrant in this country. That puts you on the wrong side of the law. So people need to understand that. And we are unambiguous about that. We are saying people are welcome to come to this country as tourists, as refugees, as immigrants, as long as they are documented and we know who they are and how long they're going to stay here. And if they're going to have permanent residency, that they will participate in our economy lawfully and pay taxes and abide by the rules of our country and our constitution. But if you're an illegal immigrant, you live outside of the law, and that is unacceptable to us. And that was one of the reasons why we were at the march, to say that you're welcome to come to this country. And our country has got a reputation internationally of being one of the warmest countries to visit. We have very warm, hospitable citizens, and it is a beautiful country. But we don't want to have illegal immigrants in our country driving illicit economy. And we've seen that the illicit economy is growing in leaps and bounds and putting more and more people out of work in this country. And we're not enjoying the revenue benefits from the illicit economy, which makes life difficult and difficult for the government to balance the books.
Before I let you go, Mr. Trollip, what should be happening next? Should this quote-unquote coronation be somewhat legally challenged? Should it be reversed? Should it be ignored? And does South Africa need a clearer national policy when it comes to foreign cultural institutions operating in the country?
Look, I think that's a very good summation on your part. We believe that the government and the president of this country needs to be unambiguous about where we stand on legal and illegal immigration. There are many nations of the world that have citizens living in this country, and they practice their cultures and their customs and their religions completely peacefully within the confines of the law. And we encourage that to continue. You know, Chinese communities, Italian communities, Greek communities, Portuguese communities, people from all over the world reside in this country, and they carry out their customs and practice fully respected and fully endorsed by ActionSA and our constitution. But what we don't have is that we don't have a provision for people coming into this country unlawfully and then staking claims to establish homelands and to threaten invitation of hundreds of thousands of their brothers and sisters to come and help establish that homeland. That, as I said, is beyond provocation. It's actually a call for colonization. And we've been colonized in this country before, and we're not going to be colonized again. And then lastly, what needs to happen is that there needs to be some investigation into this march, and those that broke the law and stoned vehicles and assaulted people and looted shops, they need to be held accountable for that, because we can't on the one hand be marching and calling for the observance of the rule of law, and then the marchers themselves then break the rule of law. There must be consequences to breaking the law in this country, and those responsible for doing that yesterday must be held to account so that this doesn't happen again, because that's when the situation can easily get inflamed and out of control, and when xenophobia can raise its ugly head. There's nothing xenophobic about talking about illegal immigration and making sure that immigrants that come into this country observe and respect our laws. That's not xenophobic. But if you behave in a violent manner and the violence is focused at a certain group of people, then it becomes xenophobia. And we as ActionSA want no part of xenophobic behavior.
There you go. Athol Trollip, Chair of ActionSA Eastern Cape. Really appreciate you giving us your time. There you go. And I think, this is one that I want you to engage with us on. I think it's a very, very important topic. The issue of foreign nationals in South Africa. How should South Africans, most importantly, balance out what many call xenophobic sentiment with legitimately speaking out with the fact that there's an influx of illegal foreigners in the country and something needs to be done about it? I don't think a lot of South Africans, if any, have a problem with our brothers and sisters from the African continent or any part of the world. But it is legitimate and it becomes problematic when obviously xenophobic sentiment starts to rear its ugly head. I think that needs to be condemned. South Africa, it is what it is today because a lot of those that fought for our freedom were welcomed with open arms in other parts of the continent, other parts of the world. They were fed, they were trained, they were protected. But in hindsight, that doesn't mean we must let South Africa be an open for all. We know the consequences of that. We know that the porous borders that we have, which is largely the fault of the government, ultimately lead to the flow in and out of criminals, the flow of illicit trading of all types of goods, and ultimately it puts not only South Africans in danger, but the economy. You have people that can't work because goods are not taxed. You have people's vehicles that are taken over the border, and I think it gets dangerous when the government doesn't act, and you have these marches that are essentially led by these organizations that just pop out of nowhere. The examples of this the world over, where these organizations will grow and grow and get to a point where it gets really dangerous and they even outmuscle the government. Now, this is where the government needs to be decisive. They need to take action because we're entering very dangerous territory here. We are entering muddy waters where things can get dangerous very, very quickly, because you can hear even the quote unquote foreign nationals, the extremist ones, they'll tell you that, we're not going to just sit back and be attacked. We're going to respond. And South Africans are saying, you're not going to respond. This is our country. And when we say you need to get out, you need to get out. So government needs to act very, very quickly. And I think you can engage with us. What do you think needs to be done with that coronation of Mr. Solomon, who's been crowned the leader of the Igbo community in the East London? Our studio line is 011-680-0355 on WhatsApp. You can send us a voice note. You can send us a message on 061-766-0355. And my parting shot is, it's very, very unfair and very, very dangerous when South Africans are going to be speaking out about the influx of foreign nationals into the country, and people just disregard them. They just say, oh, stop being xenophobic. It's very, very dangerous territory. And most people that utter those sentiments are people that don't know the effects of illegal immigration and the impact that it has, especially on the poorest of the poor in our country. So we need to be very, very careful. And I think most importantly, the buck needs to stop with government. Government needs to act as quickly as possible. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, News and Views continues.